Welcome to 2 Cents We See Scary Movies, the podcast where we dive into horror films one theme at a time. Each month we pick a theme and every movie we review fits within that theme. Sometimes perfectly and sometimes, well, we just try to do our best. I'm Talon, the one who would absolutely start a camping trip with good intentions but end up stealing the getaway car because survival comes first and romance can wait. And my co-host is Dan, who, if a gang of delinquent teenagers tried to terrorize him, he would convince them to settle things with a high-stakes game of rock, paper, scissors, only to reveal at the last second that he always plays flamethrower. This week we're talking about Eden Lake, a movie... A movie that proves your worst nightmare isn't supernatural forces or serial killers. It's a pack of hormonal, rage-fueled teens who skip their last 3 therapy sessions. Let's get into it.
All right, so as said, we are talking about Eden Lake. It's a 2008 movie. It's rated R at 97 minutes. It's written and directed by James Watkins. It stars Kelly Riley as Jenny. I found that she's actually in Yellowstone now, so
yeah,
she's got a couple big things. Michael Fassbender as Steve, Jack O'Connor as Brett, and Tara Ellis as Abby. There are more people involved in the movie,
right,
but those are kind of like the four bigger ones.
Yeah.
And if you want to look for this yourself, it's on pretty much all the free streaming services like Pluto TV, Tubi, Freevee, like anything like that, it's there. It's got an IMDb rating of 6.7. Getting into the movie itself, the first scene is just an opening scene of shots of water mixed with like a woman bleeding, which is Jenny. Then it flashes to black and then back to the water, back to Jenny until you hit the title screen. After the title screen, it opens up to a bunch of kids in a classroom, kind of like kindergarten age. When you're thinking about this movie, that's not the first thing you would come across. It opens up on the kids, and we see a young female, which we learn later is Jenny, and she appears very happy with what she's doing. And she kind of carries that throughout the entire movie. She doesn't seem to have like a lot affect her.
Right.
And it's the end of class, so it's the end of the day. As she walks all the kids out, she takes one last look at her classroom before she leaves for the weekend, and she's looking at her room very adoringly and smiling at the room itself. Next, we have an outside shot of the school, and we see a man sitting in an SUV across the street. We end up getting a close-up of the guy. His name is Steve. You learn that later on. And that's the other thing about this movie, too, is like you don't really learn the characters' names until later into the movie. So it does get kind of hard to follow as far as names are concerned until they actually say them, which is, like I said, like a little further down into the movie. So this ends up being Steve, and he's getting what appears to be a engagement ring. He really shouldn't do it, but, you know, if he must. And I think that's the most horrific thing of the whole movie. So we see Jenny running over to the car, and Steve quickly hides the ring from her, you know, because, you know,
right,
we can't ruin the
surprise.
So she gets in the car, and they greet each other, and they decide to spread cooties by kissing each other, and ride off after. So then we get a couple pickup shots of the city that they're driving from. They're driving and talking, and she's kind of comparing her friend's Paris trip to the quarry that, what did she say? Her dead quarry, and he ends up correcting her and says it's a flooded quarry. I don't really see what the big difference is, but it's a quarry versus Paris. I mean...
Right. That was the point more so than anything else.
Right. And they had some flirtatious conversation. Steve flips on a vibrating seat, and like he's all kind of kinky about it, and she's like, no, actually, this is quite nice. You know, there's a lot of driving shots in the beginning, and they're just kind of going from like how to give you the time frame of like what they're doing. It's going from like daylight into nighttime, and he's using GPS, but he still doesn't seem to know where he's going. Because as he's pulling up to a stoplight, he's like, where am I supposed to go? And then the GPS says, turn left.
Did you notice during their ride, though, there were parts where, I think it was really close to the beginning of their drive, where they had the radio on and there were a couple of talk radio or something, and what they were talking about on the radio?
No, I wasn't really paying attention to the radio.
Okay, because it was very much foreshadowing. So...
Okay.
On the radio, they were talking about, basically, it was about children and their behavior and how... Because this takes place in England somewhere.
Yes, England.
Yeah. And they were talking about how they want to hold parents responsible for their children's behavior and possibly even fining parents. And they were just going on and on about how bad kids are behaving nowadays. And I was like, oh, foreshadowing.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that, but I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, that's usually why that kind of stuff is in there.
Right.
So anyways, he starts to go through the light, and he ends up getting cut off by a bunch of kids on bicycles. And he's a little bit of annoyed, but this is kind of foreshadowing the entire weekend that they have in store for them. So they go to the bed and breakfast. When they get there, he goes to pull into a spot that another car is pulling out of. Then the guy quickly runs right into it and takes his spot. Obviously, Steve's a little annoyed, which I totally get. And the whole time, Jenny is still kind of happy-go-lucky. She's just trying to go with the flow, trying to enjoy herself. With Steve being annoyed, he ends up going to the back of the building, assumably, the way he starts driving. So the next scene, we see a bartender just kind of talking with some patrons, and you have Steve and Jenny in the back. Steve is trying to get the bartender's attention, and the bartender's not listening. Again, Steve's kind of getting annoyed. Jenny ends up getting the bartender's attention, which I can see why. She's a young, attractive young lady.
Right.
And the bartender is like, oh yeah, hey. So Steve gives her the money, and they were able to buy their beers. Then they're outside at a picnic table, and there's a bunch of kids running around, just yelling and screaming, just being a nuisance. Steve and Jenny are just kind of having a conversation. It's kind of past their bedtime, and Jenny's like, yeah, the kids look exhausted. Steve's about to say someone should really swat them or hit them or whatever. Before he could finish the sentence, the mother just goes on, hauls off on the kid and smacks him really hard.
Right.
And Steve stops talking, and they just kind of look at each other like, oh, that's awkward. And the mother and Jenny kind of lock eyes, and Jenny puts her head down, and the mother's just still kind of staring at her like, you want to go, bitch?
Right.
And she ends up walking off, and so they're all set there. They end up in their bedroom, and there's fighting and glass breaking and yelling all throughout the room. Jenny's just laying in bed while Steve's in the bathroom. And Steve comes out of the bathroom, and he's just joking with her, like, do you want to get beat up or something like that?
Yeah. Like
a joke kind of like that. They end up getting in bed. She says how romantic this whole thing is so far. Steve assures her that it wasn't like this last time. Right. I mean, it's not last time, it's this time. And this time it kind of sucks.
And when was the last time?
Right.
20 years ago?
Right. And she makes the point to say, yeah, what, drinking with your buddies?
Yeah.
Because of course, you might not notice it because you might be the unruly people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So they start making out, and then the scene ends. The next day, they're driving to the quarry, and they show that the quarry's name is Slottin on the GPS, but a developer called Eden Lake is taking it over, and they're going to build like a bunch of developments. And that's why Steve wants to go, because he wants to see it as it is one last time before all these things are in place.
Yeah, I guess they're putting up a bunch of condos and houses and shit like that, probably.
Yeah. As they drive through, on the back of the Eden Lake development sign is a bunch of graffiti that says, fuck off, yuppie cunts.
Right.
So that's a warm and friendly gesture.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I understand, like, Australia, that word is heavily used.
Yeah, in a good way.
As normalcy, right.
Yeah.
I don't believe England has that same connotation to it. I think it's the same as ours.
Yeah, it was definitely indicative of a good time.
Yes, definitely so. So they drive up to a gate that is locked, and it has a keep out construction sign on it. Steve's all bummed, and Jenny's just like, how romantic this is. Steve's like, will you trust me? Again, as I said in the previous podcast, there's always that one person that keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and shit happens.
Right. When will you learn?
So Jenny has a smile on her face, taking everything in stride. It looks like to me that she's just more enjoying the time that she has with Steve. Like,
right.
Everything else is secondary. She's just glad that she's with him. I want to take this time to say, at this point, I would say Jenny is the most likable character in this movie.
Okay.
In my opinion, I think she's the most likable out of everybody.
You didn't like Steve?
I like Steve, but I also kind of feel like he did kind of bring some of the shit onto himself. But we'll get into that later.
Okay.
Yes, I'm victim blaming Steve.
That's quite the blame right there, considering, but okay.
I mean, I don't think he deserved what he got, don't get me wrong, but I do think he was cause of some of the agitation.
Okay.
So the fence is a long, long fence, and they just drive for some distance on it. And Steve kind of quips that it used to be a public park, like that matters at this point.
Right.
So they find an entrance, and they finally drive through into the woods. And the GPS says, turn around. They kind of laugh. I kind of feel like they should have listened.
Yeah.
You know,
It knew.
Yeah, it did. It's like, get the fuck out. It's like Amityville Horror. Get the fuck out. No,
Right.
I'm going to stay. So they plow through some bushes and get out, because that's what it looked like when they parked. They just kind of plowed through some bushes. They get out of the car, and the camera pans from the couple to show a beautiful view of trees, the mountains, and the water. When I think quarry, I think like a bunch of rocks and just kind of like, water. This is like a beautiful lake. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, when I think quarry, it's usually this deep hole and there's dirt and rocks and whatever everywhere. It's not that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. From there, they end up walking quite a distance into the woods, and they see a little boy just kneeling in the middle of this little clearing with a bike. We later learn his name is Adam, but he's just sitting there looking down at his phone. They go up to him, and Jenny kneels down and starts asking him who he was and everything. And he says, my mom tells me not to talk to strangers. And she says, yep, she's right. And they just go off on their way.
He may have been on his phone, but he was actually out there catching caterpillars, maybe, or butterflies.
Yeah, that's right. He said he was catching caterpillars. So they continue to walk until they get to a beach. It's a tiny beach. It's long, but it's not very like long in the sense of like it goes from like one side all the way to the other, but the beach deep to the water is not very far.
Right.
The next scene, Steve is flirting and more making out when we see them. When we see some teens walking through the woods, and they're just kind of being a little loud and a little rowdy, but nothing bad at this point. They're just kind of there, and they're just about on the opposite side of the beach. One spits in the water, and they're being loud. And for me, that's unruly because I hate spitting. I hate seeing people spit. It's a pet peeve of mine. It's so disgusting. Jenny and Steve kind of take notice, but they don't really do anything at this point. Jenny sees that they have Adam with them. They seem to be picking on Adam. Jenny comments on it that they're being mean to him, and Steve's like, well, boys will be boys. He just kind of feels like as long as they leave them alone there, then it's okay, no big deal. Adam gets run off by two of the bigger kids, so he just leaves. Jenny ends up falling asleep, which I don't know. I don't think I'd really be falling asleep when I'm seeing this kind of stuff, because I mean, they're not quite unruly yet, but I wouldn't really be trusting of them.
Yeah, there were like what, 6 or so of them, maybe.
Yeah,
6 kids, and then
about there.
They were playing music really loud, and they were just kind of being. I mean, you could tell that they were just going to be obnoxious.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Jenny falls asleep, and a short time later, a White Rattler wakes her up, barking in her face. There's a few more teens that join them, and they have loud music going at this point. The main teen, that ends up being Brett. He ends up calling the dog over. When Jenny looks over, the dog is sitting, and then all of a sudden it gets up and it shit on the sand. Jenny and Steve, they don't look impressed at all.
Right.
They're not really too keen on that happening. Steve, in his infinite wisdom, ends up leaving Jenny alone on the beach, and he goes swimming, which, again, one of the reasons why, Steve's not a favorite of mine, because he keeps leaving Jenny in vulnerable situations. They end up showing a wide shot of the beach, just kind of showing the distance between Jenny and the kids. And the dog comes back, and he's barking at Jenny again, and the teen calls him over. Brett calls him over. This is as Steve is getting out of the water. He ends up just kind of standing on the beach, looks at Jenny, looks at their bikes, looks over at the kids, and starts walking over. He kindly asks them to turn down the music, and Brett is messing with him like, What? I can't hear you. This kind of goes on just a couple times. Steve ends up taking it upon himself and turns down the radio himself. They're like, what are you doing? And he's like, could you please keep the dog away from my girlfriend because it's scaring her? And Brett corrects him, saying that it's a bitch. And he's like, what? Because he mistook the dog for a he. Right. And the girl, Abby, that's with them, is like, it's a girl. He's like, well, my girlfriend's scared. He's like, no, it's a bitch.
Right.
And Steve asks Brett, like, what? He's like, it's a bitch. And so it's kind of like a double entendre. Like, he's talking about his dog and his girlfriend. And then Abby's like, what, you looking at my tits? And just kind of being obnoxious with that. So Steve is pleading with them, like, hey, could you keep it down? Steve ends up starting to walk away. and they turn the radio back up again. They just start laughing. Steve ends up laying next to Jenny, and Jenny's like, why don't we go somewhere else? Steve's like, no, I'm not going to be run off by them. Which again, Steve isn't making the best choices.
Well, I have to say, I would agree with Steve, because at this point, if it were me, I'd be like, fuck them. I'm not going anywhere. They're going to leave before I leave, because I would absolutely put my foot down there. I wouldn't let them run me off either. That'd be my stance as well.
No, I get it. I get both their points. Jenny's not comfortable, and Steve's like, no, I'm not leaving.
Although she really, all she wanted to do was move further down the beach, which could also be acceptable in some terms. Like if they got to the point where they were being really obnoxious and coming towards us and doing dumb shit, then maybe I'd try to move further down the beach, if that would even make a difference. But I definitely wouldn't leave. I wouldn't let them force me to leave the beach. That would be a big no for me.
Right. No for me, dog. Then we have a shot outwardly towards the lake with the music blaring. The next scene, we see a binocular sort of view, and it's of Jenny. We end up seeing that it's Brett with the binoculars. Abby doesn't seem overly impressed, but she doesn't really say or do anything. Jenny covers up her bikini, like with a shawl or whatever, and all this time Steve is asleep. Then the group of teens end up starting to leave, and they start walking by Steve and Jenny, and Brett pulls out his dong and starts shaking at Jenny and just kind of like letting it hang out and whatnot, which was kind of odd to me, but kids don't really make the best decisions in the world. I remember I used to make them.
Yeah.
I never did that, but
yeah, me either.
The teens end up leaving, and Jenny asks Steve, kind of sarcastically, if he's happy. The next scene, we see Steve setting up camp, and he throws the tent up in the air, and it pops out, and he's all impressed with himself, gets Jenny's attention, and she thinks it's funny. And Jenny's getting firewood, and she ends up looking to the side into the woods. We also get a shot from the woods looking down at Jenny, kind of giving the impression that they're being watched. Jenny and Steve are cuddled by the fireplace, and Steve is going for the ring when they start hearing like a screeching sound in the woods, and Steve decides not to do it. He ends up putting it back because they don't know what that noise is. You see another shot again of like someone watching, and this time you kind of know they are because the camera's a little bit less steady and there's breathing behind it. There's definitely something going on with someone in the woods. It's kind of like a first-person shot. Cuts back to them, stating that they would like to go into the tent, and then they go back to that first-person view of them in the woods. And then Stenny and Jenny are in the tent, making out again. Now, at this point, we're about 20 minutes into the movie, and they've made out 3 times.
Right.
They just can't stay off of one another. The noises get worse, and so they're interrupted, and Steve is just trying to say, oh, it's a wind or a fox.
Right. What's a fox say?
Right, exactly. I thought it was...
Right.
But apparently it's like weird, almost like people's whistling sort of noise.
Well, to me, when I was listening to it, because I actually have a note on this part, because she kept going, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that? And to me, it just sounded like some sort of an animal making a shrieking sound. When you're camping, you're going to hear animal noises of some sort. Birds, frogs, bugs, whatever. If there are other bigger animals, you might hear them too. But she just kept going on and on and on about, what's that? What's that? What's that? And it basically, to me, sounded like animal noises. And I'm like, lady, you're on a beach that's on a lake. And it's in the middle of the woods. Of course there's going to be noises, like animal noises. What are you getting freaked out every time? I was like, that kind of drove me crazy. I'm like, granted, of course, it's set up that way in the movie because of the way the movie is, and they want it to seem tense and whatever. But I'm like, just don't go camping.
Well, I just kind of took it as that she's just kind of like a timid person, and like little things like that are going to freak her out, like if she doesn't know what they are.
They must. She's never been in the woods. I don't know.
Right. So Jenny's not feeling very comfortable, and she's still expressing her displeasure. Steve decides to gaslight her and says that it's all in her head, even though he can hear it himself. He's like, oh no, you're not hearing anything. So Jenny's pretty adamant, so Steve goes out to check. It's like not even 2 seconds he's out there, and she's yelling, Steve! 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 You hear Steve in the background going, hello! Hello! And then all of a sudden you can't hear Steve anymore. So Jenny's getting scared, and Steve pops through the tent, scaring the shit out of her. And so she ends up flipping him and gets on top of him, calling him an oaf, which again, they just can't stay off of each other. I mean, they're boyfriend, girlfriend, madly in love,
right.
Gross. We cut to a view of the water, and the next day, Jenny gets out of the tent and she sees bugs crawling all over her food.
Yeah, why didn't they close that shit?
I have no idea, and the sausages were all broken open, and bugs were crawling all over it, and I mean,
all
it
you do
looked
is
nasty.
zip it up.
Yeah, absolutely, zip it up. That's what Brett should have done.
Right.
So they're in the car, and Jenny's like just expressing, how hungry she is. She says she's starved. So Steve ends up backing up, and all of a sudden we hear like a whoosh sound. Like the tire just got popped. So he gets out to look, and sure enough, the tires popped, and he ran over a broken bottle. Now, I've never, ever in my 40 years of driving have ever had a broken bottle pop my tire.
And those tires, that was a Jeep, or it was some kind of off-roadish vehicle.
Yeah, it was like an SUV.
They went through some shit to get where they were.
Right.
It was not an easy drive there, and they have decent tires. Like, how that bottle popped those tires, I'm shocked.
I mean, I have an SUV, and those tires are thick.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how a broken bottle broke it, but it's the movie. I mean, that's what they did.
I drive a Prius. I don't have big-ass fucking tires, but I will often drive over glass. Doesn't do anything to my tires. I don't know.
So, I mean, it's a silly plot point, but the tire gets popped just to kind of show how obnoxious the teens were. Because Steve was able to change the tire no problem, and so they end up going on their way. They go to town, and they see a bunch of kids on their bikes, and it happens to be Brett and crew. Right.
They're the only kids in town that have bikes, by the way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Steve follows them, and he ends up losing him down like this path because it's got like those car blocks, like those metal posts that are in the area so your car can't through. They end up riding their bikes through that, and so he can't go through there. Jenny's just like through the whole thing, like leave him alone, just let's get going. And so they end up going to a diner to get breakfast. Steve starts asking them about the kids, how unruly they can be. And at first the woman is fairly cordial. She's like, kids are that way. Steve starts talking more into the story, about popping tires and be obnoxious. And all of a sudden the waitress kind of gets a look on her face like, not my kids.
Right. Like she was like sudden change and super pissed.
Yeah. Steve continued to talk a little bit, and she's like, not my kids. And she ends up kind of storming off. So we learn that she's the mother of at least one of them.
Yeah. I either figured that she was saying that not my kids, like my kids wouldn't do that. Or those kids specifically are not my kids. And so I'm not going to talk about it. But this is at the point of the movie where I was like, I could tell already that this is one of those high anxiety, I'm going to be fucking frustrated and pissed off the whole movie kind of movie.
Right.
Because these are those movies that I have a love-hate relationship with them, because I do love these kind of movies where the protagonist is, they're the good people, they're the good guys, they're doing the right thing. And you see all this shit happening to them, and either nobody's believing them or no one's helping them out, and it's so fucking frustrating. And I'm like fuming the whole fucking movie because I'm so pissed that even though I know, because typically it works itself out and the bad guy gets what's coming to them. And so that at the end you're going to get that satisfaction.
Is that foreshadowing?
But you're still frustrated and pissed off the whole movie, yelling and screaming at the television. By the time I got to this scene, and when this lady was acting like a bitch and all of a sudden just being really shitty, and I was like, oh, this is one of those movies. It's one of those movies.
Well, and again, it kind of goes back to the radio, just talking about how parents aren't really disciplining their kids and stuff. So, I mean...
Which is really, I find, the theme of this movie is that right there.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in the end, I guess. And also, at this point, I don't know if it was this point or the next thing with the next car issue, but at one of these car issues, I was like, all right, just get your shit and go home.
Right.
This is obviously your dream romantic engagement surprise is kind of ruined. Okay, just fucking pack your shit up and go home. But no, of course they didn't write it that way. But anyway.
And again, that's why I kind of struggle with Steve, because Jenny's all happy about, she doesn't care one way or the other, if we stay or if we go, she'll be happy. But she seems like she's kind of more on the way of, hey, kind of let's go.
Right.
But Steve's like, no, we're going to stay. And so that's why I just kind of think Jenny's better than Steve.
I kind of viewed them to be equal, the same. I didn't have any disdain in any way towards either one of them, except for the tent issue with the noises that drove me a little crazy. Outside of that, well, there was another part that she drove me nuts in. I was like, oh God, but we'll get to that part later.
Okay. So they start driving, they finish their breakfast and they start leaving. And as they go, they see a bunch of bikes that I guess resemble the kids' bikes at this house.
They're the only kids that have bikes apparently in town.
Right, exactly. So Steve sees them and he ends up stopping and he ends up going towards the house that they're at. And he just kind of walks in. The door's open, but technically that's breaking and entering. Weird. He's kind of, I would say, mudroom because you kind of see like a bunch of alcohol bottles and it's just like in a disarray. But as he starts walking through the house, it's a fairly well put together house. It looks nice until he gets to the stairs when he sees like a door that has a hole punched through it. Jenny is left in the car. Another car comes up behind her and starts honking violently at her, saying, move, you stupid bitch. And so she ends up moving the car like a little further down. And now all the while, Steve's in this house. The guy who told Jenny to move walks up to the front, I would say the front door, where Steve is currently. He starts to come in and Steve sees him. And so what does he do? Like every other person should for safety, runs upstairs. Now, he could have easily gone around the living room, back out that outside door because it was unlocked.
Yeah, the way he came in, because that guy, he saw his shadow because the window, there's glass in the door, but it's like...
it's like a frosted window.
Yeah, so he could see his shadow. He could have easily backed up and just gone out the way he came in. But no, let's just run up the stairs because who knows where it can go from there.
Right. So Jenny can see the guy from her point of view walking into the house. There's really nothing she can say at that point. She couldn't really even call him because then she'll give away where he's at. So Steve, like I said, he runs upstairs and he ends up going into bedroom, and it looks like a teenager's bedroom. He ends up going up to just trying to look to see where he can go, if there's any place that he can go. And the man downstairs is tossing his alcohol and he's kind of touching the punched hole. I don't know if he was admiring his work or saying whatever, but as Steve's upstairs, he ends up tripping over something and the guy yells out, Brett, is that you? So we learn that it's Brett's father. He's in Brett's house in Brett's bedroom.
Right. So happens. Amazing.
Right. He's yelling at Brett to come downstairs, thinking that it's Brett. Steve finally finds a window that he can go out of, but he looks outside and he sees, all the teens that was harassing him outside kind of kicking this cage, which is, it kind of looks like a rabbit cage. And they're hitting it, punching it. Yeah, oh, absolutely. And
they're terrorizing whatever animal is in that cage.
Yes. And so the guy, Brett's dad, starts walking up the stairs and Steve can hear it. So he goes out the window and he kind of flattens himself on the roof and shimmies over to a wall and he jumps down just as Brett's father pops his head out. Some miraculous maneuvering there.
And didn't get seen by the kids either. So
Right. Brett's dad pops his head out and starts yelling at Brett. Steve gets to the car and they start to drive off. Jenny ends up just kind of giving him that school teacher look, like he's in trouble. Yeah. And all she says is you could have broken something. Now, there is no mention of the fact that he just broke into someone's house.
Right.
Not only could he have broken something, but possibly gotten killed by these people for trespassing. But he could have broken something. So that part kind of annoyed me because they could have been so much worse that happened to him than a broken bone. But, it is what it is. He just kind of snickers at the whole thing and they just kind of go off. So they end up going back to the beach. I'm assuming it's the same beach.
Yeah.
Because, quarries typically don't have a lot of beaches.
I don't even know quarries had beaches until this movie. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Maybe quarry means something different in England. Who knows?
Maybe it does, actually. We'll have to look that up.
Right. So again, they're back at the beach, and Jenny at this point isn't looking as happy-go-lucky as she has been. I mean, she doesn't look quite miserable, but she's also kind of has that
frazzled a little bit. She's kind of just okay, this has been kind of okay, good, but I'm ready to go now. So
Steve kind of gets in his idea to kind of joke around with her and makes it all better by running her into the water. She ends up laughing and they kiss. So apparently his little trick worked. Me personally, that would piss me off even more. But, for her, she thought it was funny and they kissed. And yet again,
anything to get kissing in this movie.
Yeah, and any chance But I guess that's good to kind of show their love
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing. But you can see that they're being watched again. So Steve is coming out of the water, and this is where he becomes Scuba Steve.
Right. Yeah. He
Because
suddenly had all this scuba gear.
And he did make a comment when he brought it up saying, look at what I found in the lake, or you'd be surprised what you find in the lake, or something like that. Because I was like really confused at first, like, where did he get the scuba gear? But then they made that comment. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. He puts it down, and Jenny ends up looking and sees that their bag is missing. And it had their keys, it had their IDs, and like all the important stuff, it was in that bag. When they realized the keys were missing, they give each other that oh shit look. They run out to the woods, and they don't see their car. Now, it's also worth mentioning that where they parked the car in relation to the beach, it's quite a distance. I would guess to say it's at least a quarter of a mile.
Right, yeah.
So it's not really within 3 feet, oh my god, I'm missing my car, or like that they would actually hear the car being driven away.
Yeah, it would have to be a good enough distance to where when the car started, they didn't know it.
Right. So, obviously Steve is pretty pissed. They end up walking up to a clearing. All of a sudden, the car comes barreling out, almost hitting Jenny and Steve. We see Brett driving with Steve's sunglasses and the rest of the teens in the car, and they're flipping him off. They end up fishtailing, stopping. Brett kind of looks at them and just kind of drives off. Steve ends up picking up Jenny because she's getting kind of tired. And we see an overhead shot, Jenny walking through the woods. That's another thing with this movie. There's a lot of walking in the woods and running in the woods and driving in the woods. It's a very woods-based movie. So they end up coming across the group of teens again. They have a fire going, just kind of messing around, doing their shit. They got their dog with them. And Steve wants to go to approach them. And Jenny's she just wants to cut our losses. We've messed with these guys enough. Let's just let it go. And Steve's like, nope, they got my car. So again, I understand both positions. Steve wants his car back. I get it. But I also understand, Jenny not wanting to be fucked with anymore.
Right. Because they could have easily just walked back into town, called the police. Eventually, those kids would have to go home at some point.
Right, exactly. Again, we see the teens, the group of teens, they're kicking at this cage that also has an animal in it, and they're just torturing this poor animal the whole time, and they're just being complete dicks about the whole thing. Steve confronts them, stating that he wants his car back. Brett is saying, well, he doesn't know where it is, and there's this kind of a pissing contest going back and forth. The dog is barking at Steve the whole time. Steve hears his cell phone go off, so he ends up lunging at Brett to go get his phone, and they start fighting. One of the other teens, I'm not sure which one, I think maybe Ricky, pulls out a knife, and Steve sees it while Brett has him. He ends up grabbing Ricky's hand with the knife. The dog at this time gets loose and starts to go attack Steve. The dog ends up getting stabbed in the neck accidentally, ultimately by Steve, because Steve was able to wrestle the knife away. Brett checks on the dog as Steve is just sitting there looking in shock. Jenny's in the background watching this whole thing unfold. She's also in shock because nobody wanted to hurt the dog. That was not anybody's attention at all. And so Brett ends up leaning down, and that's when we see that the dog's throat is cut. Brett's upset at this point, and he looks at Steve saying, "You killed my dog." Steve is trying to be the nice guy, tries to offer to take the dog to the vet, which at that point, this is the one time I could say I kind of agree with Brett, because you just attacked my dog. Granted it was an accident, but you killed my dog and you're trying to bring him to the vet. Go fuck yourself, man. But Steve is trying to be the nice guy and trying to take care of stuff.
Yeah, I will say at this point, Steve is a better man than I could be, because even though my favorite dog is a Rottweiler, I love Rottweilers. They're the best freaking dogs. I wasn't happy that the dog got killed, but because of these kids, I would be more pissed at the kids. When the kid was like, "You killed my fucking dog," Steve's like, "It's an accident," and I'm like, I would have been like, "Yeah, I didn't mean to stab your dog, but I told you to keep your dog away. You guys have been fucking with us all weekend because you guys are a bunch of fucking little hoodlums, so fuck off." I would have not had any compassion for him being upset that his dog, I would be upset that the dog was dead, but I wouldn't have any compassion for that kid for the fact that his dog died. I've been like, fuck you.
I mean, Steve's trying to be
I'm really frustrated by this point.
No, because I mean, Steve is trying to be the nice guy. Brett's not in the mood to hear it. Brett ends up throwing the keys, telling him to fuck off, and Jenny grabs him. And he looks at the dog, just saying, just fucking die, because he's upset and he just wants the dog to not be in pain. Steve is still there trying to talk to Brett. Jenny has the keys. She's like, hey, let's go. We see another teen, I think that was Mark, pulls another knife. So Jenny and Steve run off.
And Steve dropped the knife he had. Like, why the fuck are you dropping that knife, dumbass?
Right. Well, I think it was part of the shock thing. Like, oh my God, what did I just do? Drop the knife.
But still.
So Jenny and Steve are still running and hear Brett in the background yelling at the others to go after them. So they end up getting to the car and the teens are still in chase. And Steve is having trouble driving through the woods because it's not the best terrain. Granted, it's an SUV, but it's really bumpy and rocky. They end up trying to go up a hill and they end up getting stuck. At that point, the teens are throwing rocks and jumping at the car. They're, banging on it, hitting it with sticks. They end up breaking the windshield. And all this time, Steve is trying to back the car out and it finally breaks free and drives off.
Well, they also broke the headlights. So that's significant because they can't see now because it's fucking dark in the woods.
Yep, and that's what Steve says. He's like, I can't see anything. He ends up hitting what looked like to be a rock, or it could have been a tree, but he hits a very hard object where the car cannot be used any further. Steve is hurt, and he just tells Jenny to go get help.
Yeah, I didn't realize when they hit whatever they hit, because I couldn't tell what they hit either. But obviously there was some kind of a tree there because the whole tree limb comes through the windshield and pins him into the car and he can't get out. But I couldn't tell when they hit that's what happened until he was trying to get the tree, because he was trying to get it off, she was trying to get it off, and finally he was just like, go. So
at this point, the teens are still kind of looking for them because they didn't see what direction they actually went into or how far they got. Jenny is able to hide underneath this rather large tree trunk, underneath the roots, and the teens run by her and they don't see her. So they get to the car and they see Steve that's in the driver's side, and they break the window. That's the last you see of that for the time being. Jenny ended up kind of camping the night away there.
Which that's the part, by the way, that I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Because when morning came, she comes out from under this giant tree roots or whatever. And I'm like, what? You stayed there all fucking night? I'm like, You had all night to walk somewhere and you slept or did whatever under this tree. This is the part where I was referencing earlier that I was going to talk about because it annoyed me that you would think adrenaline alone. There were a lot of times in this movie where I'm like, the adrenaline alone should make this easier for you. This shouldn't be too big of a problem.
Right.
Because it's amazing what adrenaline can do for you when it comes to pain. Like, you know my little story about Papa John's.
Yes.
And yeah, during the entire time that was going on, I knew I was being hit, but I couldn't feel it. Because the adrenaline was pumping, I felt nothing. It didn't hurt, nothing until the next day. The next day it was fuck. But yeah, but that as it was going on, felt nothing. It was weird. But because the adrenaline's rushing through you so fast and so hard, you just don't feel it. But I don't know if I could have just sat there under that tree all night. I would have been like, I gotta get the fuck out of here and go get someone to get back here and help me. I don't know how she stayed there all night. What the fuck?
I agree. I'd be too nervous, to just stay there all night. I'd end up having to go. Once I heard the kids go past, I probably would have waited a few minutes and then just kind of took off.
Because there were a lot of those moments too, where I'm like, wait a minute, they just left. Hold on a second before you come out of where you're hiding. What are you doing? There were a lot of those moments too. But I guess you only have so much time in a movie. Might have been a little bit nervous, but I just would have been like, I got to get somebody to get back here and get these fucking kids. My mission, the whole point after that would have been, someone's got to come and destroy these children. And that would be my whole goal, was someone come and absolutely just rip them a new one and fuck them the fuck up. Something, whatever.
Yep.
So anyway, go ahead.
So we find that she's hiding all night and she gets out of the tree trunks and she goes back to the car, and lo and behold, Steve is gone. So she sees a blood trail and follows it. As she moves, she can hear voices of the teens. She starts to slow down. She sees Ricky through the woods standing over Steve. Steve is tied to a tree stump. They end up doing a close-up, and he's tied up with barbed wire. So Steve was trying to say, hey, nobody died. We should be able to be okay. That ended up pissing Brett off because the dog ended up dying. He ends up threatening Jenny if she finds her.
Yeah, that's the payback. One bitch for another bitch, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of eye for an eye, bitch for a bitch.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think Ricky is telling Brett that he's going too far with everything, which pisses Brett off even more. Brett says he has to die because he'll end up calling 999, which for those not in the know, that's the British version of 911. So one of the teens says, I think it was Ricky, says, I've never touched him. Brett kind of puts a knife in his hand and tells him to go stab him. He's very hesitant at doing this. Like, the teen is very hesitant at doing this to Steve. Brett is really pushing him, like literally pushing him and yelling at him to make it happen.
And this is one of those moments too where, and you see this a lot in movies like this, here's the bad guy and you're part of his crew. You don't want to do something and they're forcing you to do it, or there's some kind of situation and he hands you the weapon he has to go, like in this situation, to go and stab Steve. Why not take that opportunity to stab the asshole who's trying to force you to stab Steve? That's what I would have done. Take this moment to stab this asshole. But no, they never do that. Never happens.
Right. Nope. It's kind of like the guy that always pushes everybody to do the thing and then gets everybody killed.
Right.
So it keeps going back and forth between Jenny and Steve, just kind of like looking at each other, because Steve ends up seeing Jenny in the background. Steve is kind of like shaking his head, no, don't. Because like, Jenny's kind of like giving that eye like, hey, I'm going to come get you. And he's like, yeah, no, let's not do that. So that teen ends up deciding to, well, he ends up agreeing to stab after being threatened. So he ends up going to do it, and Abby, Brett's girlfriend, takes out her 2008 flip phone, cell phone to start recording the events.
She was my second least favorite character after Brett.
Yes, I would agree. So the teen ends up like cutting Steve's arm, but just barely. And really, this is like the most gruesome part of the movie, like because it's the only part that they actually show any kind of like cutting or anything like that, because everything else is kind of like a quick cut, no pun intended. A quick cut, quick shots, we'll say, between like them going to stab him, they stop, and then the end result. But they don't actually show the stabbing other than this one piece. He barely cuts Steve, and Brett yells at him to go deeper, and so he ends up cutting him deeper. As he does that, he ends up throwing up. As Jenny's watching, she covers her mouth because she wants to scream, but she knows that if she does, she's going to get screwed.
Yeah. And at this point, I'm really fucking annoyed with her because, again, she's just sitting there watching and not going and getting help. And I'm like, what are you waiting for? Like, go get help. You had a perfect opportunity last night when you decided to camp out under the tree. You didn't do it. Now you're sitting here watching them forever. Go get fucking help. I don't understand.
Right. So at that point, Brett says everybody needs to stab Steve. Let's make Steve a piñata.
Right.
So everybody takes turns stabbing him. Mark, he takes a box cutter that he had, and he goes over and he starts taunting Steve, and then he kind of cuts him rather violently.
Yeah, I actually thought he was going to be hesitant too, because he looked like he was going to be hesitant about it, like he didn't want to do it, but then he seemed pretty gung-ho while he was doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the teen we were talking about earlier, that was not Ricky. That was just a teen that I couldn't get their name of, because I don't think they ever mentioned his name. So Mark ends up cutting him with a box cutter, and then Ricky cuts him with Brett's knife. And I did make the note that you don't really see the stabbings, only as they kind of pull the knife out, probably just to keep it as an R rating, because it probably would have gotten worse if a worse rating in C-17 or whatever. So Brett ends up grabbing the youngest kid, which his name is Cooper, and he tells him that he needs to do it too. At this point, Jenny is trying to connect to Steve's phone through Bluetooth, and we don't really know why at that point, but she's trying to connect.
I didn't get that at all.
Yeah, so she's trying to connect to Steve's phone. All the teens in the area, at this point, they're really looking disgusted with Brett because they're trying to force Cooper into doing this. Cooper's like, no, I don't want to do it, and Brett's pushing him. Jenny gets connected as Cooper shoves the box cut, because Cooper ends up relenting after all the pushing and everything. Even though everybody around Brett is saying, no, we shouldn't do it, Brett's like, fuck you. And so he ends up cutting him with the box cutter, but he shoves the box cutter in his mouth, and he kind of like... And he kind of swishes it around, and that one was rough. Even though you don't really see it, it was rough. It's kind of like going back to Saw when the guy cuts off his own foot. You don't really see it happening, but
you can almost feel it.
And Steve at that point spits out like a bunch of blood, and Brett ends up wiping some of Steve's blood on Cooper's cheeks, like as if he some sort of rite of passage. It looks like that the teens are kind of starting to come around to, hey, what the hell did we just do? Jenny, as she gets connected to Steve's phone, she tries calling 999. Brett gets the notification that she's doing this, or at least Steve's phone is trying to call 999. He realizes that she's in the area, like she's close by. Steve ends up yelling to her to run. She does end up running. They get on their bikes and they start going after her, kind of like a demented E.T. scene. That's what it reminded me of, like when they're like running through the woods. It's like, oh, this is kind of like a demented ET. So I don't know how the man does it, but Steve breaks free from the barbed wire. That must have really sucked, to be quite honest. I've gotten cut on barbed wire and that really fucking sucked.
Yeah, and Steve's already a disaster at this point too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he is messed up. He is not in good shape at all. Jenny is running for dear life, which she should be. She ends up stopping and she finds this huge branch and hides. As Brett starts riding his bike by, she ends up throwing the branch in front of him, which knocks him down along with everybody else, like bowling ball pins. Brett encourages them to all chase Jenny on foot. She ends up coming to a construction site where she sees a radio, but the construction site is locked up, and she tries to reach for it, but it ends up falling and breaking, so she can't get to it. The teens end up getting there at the same time, and she's able to hide from them beforehand. At first, she's hiding like on the side of the building that she was at. As the teens start like walking around it, Brett is at the front door, which is right beside her, and I'm not sure what she had, but she had some sort of weapon in her hand. They start to show like another team. I think it's the teen that I don't know the name of. He starts walking around the building and he starts to lunge to get her, but she's not there. She was able to safely climb on top of the building, which I'm not really sure how that happened because
they were there.
They were there, and it was a metal building. I'm pretty sure they would have heard her, but
it wasn't. It was a really small little itty bitty thing too. It wasn't like it was some big ass building.
And again, we got to kind of
magic of movies.
The magic of movies, and we got to suspend reality for a few things to make it work. Brett ends up kicking in the door to get into the building to see, because I think she left her jacket or her shirt in the front. Caught. Yeah, it got caught. They don't find her, and they're still kind of hovering around when I think it was Ricky that ends up calling saying that, hey, Steve's gone. Brett's not overly worried about it because he knows the condition that Steve's in, but he still says, hey, let's go look for him. Steve is running through the woods. Again, a lot of running, a lot of walking, a lot of driving in the woods. So Steve is running through the woods, and he gets to his car, and the car alarm goes off. Steve is like shaken by this, and the teens hear the car alarm, so they start running towards it. Jenny ends up getting off of the building, and she starts running. Steve ends up hiding behind a tree, and he hears someone. He hears someone that is seemingly chasing him, and we see Ricky running through the woods because like when the footsteps come closer, when Steve gets up, he swings like a metal wrench or whatever, missing the person, and it turns out to be Jenny. So it's a good thing he didn't clock her.
Right.
They end up trying to leave the area, but that's when Jenny kind of realizes how bad off Steve really is, because he's not doing well. I mean, he's lost a lot of blood at this point from all the stabbings. They start like kind of like hobbling down a walkway, and they find like this wooden hut. I'm not really sure what it was for. It looked rather old, but it was like a wooden hut. I like this shot, and I like the juxtaposition of it. It shows like a serene shot of the water and the beauty of the mountains and everything. Kind of just showing that, no matter how horrible things are going, nature's still going to be beautiful.
Right, yeah. It was kind of, that contrast between how shitty they were looking and feeling and the torment they were going through, but yet it's still beautiful and stuff around them. Yeah.
Right. So Jenny is seen trying to patch up Steve, not really cinch up his wounds, but just trying to take care of him the best she can. She realizes how bad it really is, and Steve's like, well, how bad is it? And she's like, oh, it's fine. And he wants to look. She's saying no, but he ends up looking anyway. Where he was cut with the box cutter, it was pretty horrid. He saw black blood coming through, and he's like, oh my god, black blood, I'm literally bleeding out right now. Jenny's trying to do her best to try to keep him calm and talk him down, and as she's doing this and trying to take care of him, she ends up finding the ring. She's just kind of like in shock and awe over it, and so Steve's just talking about, the honeymoon he had planned, like going to Africa, going on like a safari. At this point, you see the teens, they start coming across some blood trail, and they're starting to go towards the wooden hut. They're making enough noise where Jenny and Steve can hear them. As the teens are going into the hut, you see a plank coming down at the same time in the floor. Steve and Jenny are under the water, like under the thing in the water. Jenny's just kind of sitting there with Steve covering his mouth so his noises don't alert the teens. And when the teens get in there, they see, blood and the first aid kit and all that other stuff. They realize that they're close by, but they don't know how close they are. So Brett is like saying, we need to go after them. And, they're doing like a lot of like tense shots. Yeah. Brett is standing over them. Whenever they move around, like they're afraid that they're going to see them like through the planks. They look at a bloody footprint. They ask Abby to put her foot near it. They realize, that Jenny is with Steve. When Brett tells them that they have to go after them, Cooper wants to go home because he's tired. And Brett's having none of it. At this point, a tense moment creeps up where one of the kids' foot goes through a plank opposite of where Steve and Jenny are, but enough to freak them out. Brett starts making fun of the kid, calling him like, now this kid's like skinny as a rail.
Yeah, I was like...
And Brett's calling him like a fat fuck and he needs to go on a diet and like all this other shit.
Right. I feel like Brett was bigger than that kid.
Yeah, absolutely he was. They end up leaving as Brett is insulting the kid. When they're gone, Jenny pulls Steve out of the water and Steve is passing out at this point. She's like trying to keep him awake and she ends up bringing him over to like a tree trunk, which probably is like the worst thing for him at this point. Probably not putting him near a tree trunk considering that he almost got killed at a tree trunk.
Right. PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, she pulls him like towards a tree trunk and she covers him up with a bunch of brush, trying to hide him.
Except his face.
Yeah, except maybe he needed to breathe.
There were big branches of just leaves and they were very light looking and they were all there, ready to be just put on something else. Like, she didn't have to pull them off of a tree. Nothing. They were just like right there.
Yeah, it was just right there.
And she grabbed them all and put them on. And you could tell they were very light. And I'm thinking, cover his face. He'll be able to breathe. He'll be fine. Just cover his face. But no, she didn't cover his face.
Well, I mean, I can tell you haven't been in the woods enough because like whenever you're near the water and tree trunks, you always have branches like that.
I'm like, I grew up in Maine around a shit ton of trees. I'm sitting here, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, were there? I'm like...
Well, considering that these branches that we're talking about were completely green, as if like they were freshly cut.
Absolutely. You couldn't burn those fuckers.
No, not to save your life.
A little too green.
So Jenny puts the ring on and shows Steve that she did. She hugs him and she goes on her way. So again, we have the running through the woods scene. Brett and crew are also going through the woods, but they're walking at this point. Brett gets a bump of Coke because you need that. And so at that point... These
kids have been out for hours. I mean,
they have.
Because at one point I was like, God, do these kids ever want to eat or lay down? They've been out all night and then all the next day.
Yeah,
their parents don't care where they are. What the hell?
I mean,
they want to sleep.
Based on what we've seen so far, I don't think the parents really give two shits.
As long as they're not under their feet. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So Cooper, again, he wants to stop. He's tired. He wants to go. So Brett gives him a bump of Coke, because that solves everything. So Jenny is still running, but this time she comes across an extremely sharp object that her foot ends up going through, and she's screaming in pain. And I give kudos to this actress because, again, like when she screams, you feel the pain yourself because of how good of a job she's portraying this situation.
At the same time, I'm like,
right.
Stop screaming.
Yep. And it's funny you say that because the teens end up hearing her. So she pulls herself to safety and like through some ferns and everything, but she ends up losing, I can't really say her footing because she was dragging herself, but she ends up rolling down a hill, quite a short distance. She ends up in front of a log and painfully pulling the object out of her foot by pushing the object on a log, and she pulls the whole thing out through the top of her foot.
You're like cringing the whole time you're watching this, and I'm thinking, how would I do this? Because it's like she's got some kind of big stick, like a piece of a stick or something that's gone through her foot.
Right, like a rod or...
Yeah, and I'm thinking, she did it so slowly, and I'm like, I don't know if I could do it slowly. I think I'd feel like I just slammed my foot as fast as and hard as I could.
You just gotta rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Just rip that Band-Aid.
But she did it so slowly, and I was like, ugh.
She's able to pull herself back up the hill through some creative ingenuity, just climbing up and you really feel like she's not going to make it because of how slippery the hill looks, but
Yeah.
she's able to wriggle herself up, and then she ends up grabbing a tree root that's exposed and was able to pull herself out. At this point, she's laying on the ground when she looks over and she sees some sneakers. She jumps up in shock, like, oh my God, what the hell just happened? You know, who are you? And it's Adam.
He's out doing his whatever he's doing with collecting bugs and shit.
Right. And she's trying to talk to him, saying, where's your mother? Can you bring me to town? Whatever. And he's just looking at her stupidly, like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was my third least favorite person in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like staring at her. And then finally he's like, oh, my mom's at work. She asks him for the way to town, and he ends up leading her through the woods again into a little field that had trunks that are like cut down, and there's like a tire swing.
Yeah. It was like a weird opening, but it seemed like it was almost went down kind of a little bit. Yeah. But as soon as he walked in there, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, shit.
Yep. You know, because he's stonewalling the whole time, saying, oh, my mom's going to pick me up here. And she's like, your mom's going to pick you up here? I thought she was at work. Well, she just got off of work. And he's just kind of like making all these lies. And he starts using his phone. And she's like, oh my God, you got service? He's like, no, I'm just playing a game. And she gets closer and she sees that he's got service. And she's like, let's call 999. And he's like, no, I need it for my mom. You know, I only have one bar. I don't have, you know, a lot of battery life or whatever.
And I'm yelling, get the fuck out of there.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so she's kind of going back and forth through this whole thing, fighting with this kid about using his phone. And then all of a sudden, we see Brett saying, how now, brown cow? And the other teens are up on top of this wall of dirt and tree trunks. Yeah. Adam looks up at Brett. Brett looks down at Adam, and he winks at him. That was the concrete evidence Jenny needed to know that she was played. Brett comes down, and he ends up knocking Jenny out. Like, just punches her and she's out. We see the next scene. Jenny's passed out. Her head is down to the side, and she ends up getting woken up by a liquid being thrown on her. At this point, we don't know what it is, and she realizes that she now is tied to a tree stump. Steve happens to be on the other side, and Steve is dead at this point. Brett says he's already dead. We don't need to do this. Brett's like, well, she's not. And Jenny's obviously terrified. And before that, Brett looks at Jenny sarcastically, says, we found him. Again, not that she hit him very well, but you know, Brett is telling them, because even though they're kind of like, don't want to do this, Brett's reminding them that they all have a hand in what's going on, so nobody should be backing out at this point. Basically saying he's got the evidence, and you know, you fuck around and find out.
What's his girlfriend's name?
Abby.
Abby.
Yeah, he nicknames her Peach, but her name is Abby.
Okay. Yeah, because this whole time she's still videotaping or video recording or whatever. Yeah. So he's holding that over them.
They're showing that the teens are still afraid. Brett grabs Adam and tells him to light a match if he wants to be part of the gang. He's kind of fumbling through it. The first match that he pulls out, it ends up going out. Brett grabs him by the back of the neck and pushing him around and stuff, telling him that he needs to do it or he's next and he better do it. So he ends up lighting a match and throwing it at Steve's body, and it catches on fire.
Mention that they put gasoline all over them. I know you said that they poured something on her, but she didn't know what it was.
I didn't mention the gas, but you know, we do find that it was gas, you know, that they were throwing on Steve and Jenny. So Brett is praising Adam, but he's still holding him by the back of the neck. Jenny's crying, as anybody would be, I would assume, in that situation. And Brett is making a point to tell everybody that it wasn't him, it was Adam. Like, he never touched anybody. And at that point, that's when I realized that in all of this that's going on, he did not touch them. Outside of punching Jenny and having that little fight with Steve, he's never, ever, ever hurt them. He was basically the Charles Manson of the group.
Right.
Everybody else is doing it under his watch, but he's not doing it himself. At this point, they show Brett, and he's really happy with what he's seeing. The flames are weakening the ropes. You can kind of see that they're starting to fray a little bit, and you see Jenny kind of wiggling. Cooper ends up puking, and Adam tries to run, and the others grab him and at this point, they randomly put a tire around him.
Yeah.
It's a small tire. I kind of feel like that was a little premature, you know, for what's to come, but they did it at that point. Maybe to just prevent him from running.
Yeah, because I always have to have my upper body for running, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, it's nice, but you know, what the fuck do I need legs for?
So Jenny breaks free because the ropes are weakened enough.
Yeah.
And she kicks over the fuel. She drops it in there, and it kind of creates a wall of fire. And she runs off. At this point, Brett grabs Adam, saying if she doesn't come back, he's gonna light Adam on fire. She's running up a hill, and she gets to a vantage point where she can see everything that's going on. Brett picks up the can, and he starts pouring it all over Adam and continuing the threats. Adam is yelling for help through this whole thing. And Jenny is freaked out, but she's not going back, which I wouldn't either. Poor Adam.
Right. Good move.
Adam's yelling for help, and then shortly after we hear a whoosh of flame, and then Adam is just screaming bloody blue murder in pain. They end up, the camera shot is of Jenny looking down, and this is where you can actually see that she can see everything. Brett lets go of Adam and lets him drop to the ground. Jenny screams. So the rest of the teens are just kind of in shock of what happened. Oh my God, he just did this to one of his own.
Right. I feel like this is when it all starts to sink in for those other kids. We are fucked.
Right. It's another peaceful shot of the water, giving that juxtaposition again of tragedy and purity. Jenny's running for several shots, and it's starting to thunderstorm out. She comes to a posted map, kind of like one of those "you are here" sort of things,
right?
So people can know where they are. But she ends up breaking the glass, and she tears the map off of the thing, and she writes something on the visitor's log, but you don't know what it is quite yet. The teens end up catching up to her, but they don't see her because she ended up jumping into this really, really nasty ass gross dumpster. And it looked like a compost heap at this point.
Yeah, it was.
Looked so
and there was hardly any trash in there. It was just sludge.
Right. That's why I'm saying it was probably a compost heap, because compost kind of gets a little sludgy.
Yeah.
So Brett and Ricky are there. They see that she took the map. Ricky's like, oh my God, she took the map. And Brett's like, I know where she's going. They find the visitor's log that she wrote on, and Ricky's like, she says, Ricky and Brett did it. We're famous. So Brett grabs the paper, crumples it up, walks over to the dumpster, and you think he's going to see Jenny, but he barely opens it, throws it in, and walks away.
Yeah, because the smell was so bad.
Right.
Yeah.
They end up walking away, and Jenny gets out of the dumpster, and obviously she's gagging from how bad the dumpster smells. And I mean, looking at it, I wanted to gag.
Yeah.
I could smell it through my TV.
And and she must have rolled around in it, because her whole face, every part of her body was covered in this black sludge. And I was like, did you have to roll around in it? I mean, couldn't you just kind of sat in it just enough to be hidden? But nope, she rolled in it.
And see, this is the part where I started to kind of feel hopeful for her, because it started to seem that she was kind of going into a Rambo mode.
Yeah, she was definitely getting into the fight mode more than the flight mode.
Right. And so she ends up going back over to the broken glass. She picks up a shard, tears a piece of her dress off, and makes a shiv out of it. And so you can see Cooper walking through the woods behind her and just staring at her. She hears him in the background, and she's looking in a mirror that was next to the map. In her face, you can see, I'm a badass. I'm gonna fucking do this shit. And so Cooper ends up coming up behind her, and you can see him in the mirror, and then all of a sudden she just whips around and jabs him in the neck.
Something significant about it, though, is when he came up to her, he was like, Miss, because he was one of the ones that threw up. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do any of that and didn't want to partake in it. And you could tell at this point that he felt bad about it, and he might have been maybe even attempting to help her.
Yeah, and at that point, I think she was just so far gone with the fear that she didn't want to hear any of it. And so she just spun around and just got him in the neck. And he's gurgling and gagging, and he's got this oh shit look on her face. First, she's got that angry look in her face, yeah, I did this. And then it was the adrenaline started to wear off a little bit, and she started to realize kind of shit, what did I just do?
Yeah, I think because it was so quick, she didn't process the context in what she was saying and the tone. I think afterwards, I feel like she realized, oh, wait a minute, he was speaking to me kindly, plus she's also a teacher of little kids, and she's not a person that's intent on out there trying to kill people. So all of that together, felt regretful of what happened.
As he's gagging, they both kind of fall to the ground, and she's still holding him. The camera's pulling out and giving a wider shot. She's still holding on to him and hugging him as he's dying. The thunder starts to roar, and it goes up to the treetops. As if you're laying down, you're seeing that the treetops. and she lets out one more cry before the scene changes. Now it's completely dark, and Brett and Ricky are looking for her. So Ricky doesn't want to keep looking because he's tired. Brett says, like, we're just going to keep going. At that point, they kind of split up, but they get a phone call. Brett is kind of yelling in anger on the phone, because she can hear Abby yelling to him. As Jenny's running through the woods, she kind of hears that same call. What we learn is that Brett comes across Abby and they find Cooper's body. Abby's just kind of like standing over him. Another teen, the one that I don't know the name of, says that he's done.
Is that his brother? I feel like Cooper was the brother of one of those other kids.
That's what I thought too, but I thought he was like Brett's brother, but I don't think he was a brother of anybody there. It was the kid that was later, the kid that was driving that Jenny found.
Well, yeah, I know that. Like, that kid and Brett are brother. No, I'm sorry. That kid and
Cooper.
Was it Cooper were brothers, right?
Yes.
So the other kid, maybe he just treated him like that because that's the other thing I wasn't sure, because he was like the youngest one there too.
Yeah, and I think that too because, you know, I kind of got the feeling that he was Brett's brother, but then I realized that it wasn't. So that part was a little confusing.
Yeah, but that one kid though that I thought was his brother was, I feel like they were all brothers, because the boy in the car, the truck or whatever the thing was, and then that other boy, and then Cooper, because that other boy got really, really upset at Cooper's death, because then it goes back to, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, that whole part was just kind of like the relationship. I mean, you know, they're all friends. You know, they're all there. It looked like their families were all friends. It was just hard to tell whose Cooper's brother was. Okay, so they come across Cooper's body, and one of the teens is like, you know, we're done. I don't want to do this anymore. Brett's again telling them that we're all in this together. We gotta keep doing this. He tells Brett that it's all his fault. Brett takes Abby's phone and shows the kid the video of them killing Steve, and the kid's like, well, I didn't really want to do that. The kid steps away and starts to make a phone call, and Brett's telling him, what are you doing? Who are you calling? And the kid's not answering him, and he's like, give me the phone. Give me the phone. And he says it several times.
Yeah.
And the kid doesn't give him the phone. So Brett ends up like grabbing it, knocking him down, and starts like just wailing on him. Just like, you know, just wailing. And then he gets up and he's kicking him and then like stomping him. And between each stomp, he's saying, fuck her. That just tells me he should have given Brett the phone.
Right. Thing is, did he end up killing that kid?
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't remember. Yeah. I was like,
yeah, I mean, they don't really show it, but I mean, just the beating that he got and the stomps, the way that the first person view that made me feel like when Brett was stomping, he was stomping the kid's head. So yeah, that kid expired. The phone ends up ringing again, and Brett looks at Abby saying, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. And Abby's just standing there looking at him.
He's very repetitive.
He is. And he's like, turn it off, you fucking bitch. Abby just looks at him, turns, and runs away. At that point, the phone stops ringing. So, I mean, he didn't have to say it so many times because it was just going to stop anyway. Brett kind of actually shows, for the first time, a very small glimpse of remorse. And I don't know if it was remorse for the fact of what was happening or if it was like, shit, I'm in trouble.
Right. That's what I felt like.
But he had some sort of remorse, whether it was selfish or not. Jenny's still running.
Right.
So she gets to the gate and she runs across it until she finds a spot where she can crawl underneath. As she gets out of there, she's running towards the road and she ends up falling over as a car was coming up to her. There's a teen that was driving it, and we haven't met this guy yet. I don't even think we even get his name at all. So he gets out and he's like, are you okay? Obviously she's not okay. I mean, she's limping, she's bloody, she's full of shit.
Yeah.
I mean, she is literally black head to toe from all the gunk that's on her. But are you okay?
Right.
So she's asking for help, and again, he's asking what's wrong. Look at her.
Yeah.
Then she's like, they killed my boyfriend. Just get me out of here. They get in the car and they start driving towards the gate. He asks what's going on, and she tells him that she's being hunted by somebody, and she ends up asking about going to town, and he's like, well, town's the other way. And she's like, what? She's like, we need to go to town. And he's like, well, no, I have to go here because my little brother has gone missing and we can't find him. You know, she doesn't say anything about, oh, well, you know, he's dead. He just keeps driving, and
my first thought when she got in the car was, that boy's probably like, damn. you stink.
Right, yeah.
She
I mean,
had to
that's what I
smell
would do.
awful. And yeah, he's all worried about and her going on and on also about the fact that she's being hunted and that somebody killed her boyfriend. And he's like, and he knows his brother's out here in the woods. Now he's worried. He's like, oh man, now I'm worried because my brother's out here.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why he's got to go back into where the gate is.
Right. And he calls Ricky to ask what's going on, and then that's when Jenny like really starts to freak out in the car. They come up to a locked fence, and the kid gets out of the car and he goes to meet Mark and Ricky. Now, I don't know where Mark has been all this time because we haven't seen him since he stabbed Steve.
Right.
But all of a sudden, Mark's there. As the kid is talking to Mark and Ricky, we see Jenny jump over to the driver's side, and she steals the kid's car and drives towards town. As she's going, he can hear the kid being like, hey, come back, and she takes off. And there's a couple different like aerial shots and side shots of her driving. Then like all of a sudden, like Abby kind of like comes out of the woods just out of nowhere. Jenny sees her, and it's like, I'm mowing you over, bitch.
Absolutely. I was yelling. I was like, just fucking hit her. Just hit her and go. Do not stop. She's my second least favorite character, so I don't care.
So she just plows right into her. She like flies over the car and, you know, just lands right on the ground, and they do a close-up and she's pretty well dead. You look at Jenny's face and her rage almost kind of looks like into like some relief.
Right.
Like, you know, I finally got like one of these bastards. She ends up passing the Eden Lake sign, and she gets cut off by this other vehicle, or she cut them off or whatever. But either way, it
was like a 4-way stop or something, and shit really stopped.
Yeah, and so she ended up getting pushed off into this person's driveway and into their car. We see her trying to get out, and she's a little shaken on top of everything that's already happened to her. She can hear music and a lot of people. She starts walking towards it. She walks to the back of the house, and she sees a pool party. Nobody really notices her at first until she yells, somebody please help me. The whole party stops and just looks at her as she falls down to the ground. And they're looking at her, like, what happened? Until one other person jumps up and says, isn't anybody going to help her? So the next scene, it's that same woman sitting next to her, over her while she's on the couch, and she's gently washing her face, I guess, but it's not coming off. She's just kind of there, maybe caressing her hair. Everybody's kind of asking what happened, and she's told that, you know, she's safe, given some tea. All this time, there's a cell phone that rings. And the way the conversation is going, it sounds like that person on the other end is telling them what's going on. Because the woman on the phone is just like, what? What did you say? You know, she did what? Yeah, she's here and she looks like shit. So she ends up kind of like walking away, asking them to repeat themselves a little bit. And then there's a Rottweiler in the house that starts barking at her. That's when she sits up and she's looking like, oh shit. She sees 2 dog dishes as the lady on the phone is saying, you know, they can't hear the person that's on the other end. Jenny ends up looking over to the side where the phone call is, and she sees the waitress from the restaurant.
I was going to ask you if that's who that was.
Yep.
So I thought that's who it was.
Yep, so she sees the waitress, so then that kind of makes sense of why she's saying not my kids, because, again, like, one of them is her kid, or 2 of them, you know, whatever. The lady on the phone says something that kind of gets everybody's attention. You really can't hear it, but, like, everybody in the room, except for the woman that was caressing her hair, ends up going into the kitchen, and Jenny's like, I'm gonna be sick, because she sees photos on the wall of Brett when he was younger. She asks for an ambulance, and the woman helping her asks for a John to come and to call an ambulance. John comes into the room, and we see that John is Brett's father. Then Jenny asks John to call the police, and John's saying, like, no, we don't need to do that, and he's trying to comfort her. Jenny starts to panic. She says that she's going to be sick. So the woman that was kind of like brushing her hair brought her to the bathroom, cleared out the people that were fucking in it, so she could go in. Jenny ends up going into the bathroom, and she locks the door immediately. She puts her head on the wall, and the commotion outside the door is starting to get more and more loud, and more people are upset about something, and you don't really know what quite yet. She slides down onto the floor, and she knows that she's in trouble.
Well, she did go into a fucking bathroom that she's not going to get out of again. Right. I hate it when people make these dumb decisions. I mean, you might as well have just gone upstairs.
Right. So she gets up and she starts looking for a way out. There is a window, but it's one of those windows that is embedded into the wall, so it doesn't move up. It doesn't, you know, it's just there for decoration. So you can hear the commotion outside the bathroom door is starting to turn into anger. And there's a lot of shouting and crying going on. And she looks in the mirror. She opens the medicine cabinet and looks through it and finds a razor, which she opens up. She walks in front of the door. At that point, they're yelling for her to open the door, calling her a bitch, open up the fucking door. She has the razor blade ready just in case they do get through. For some reason, she ends up putting the razor blade in her pocket. She starts talking to herself. I think she's praying at this point.
Yeah.
John ends up kicking the door in, and Brett is right behind him, looking scared. John asks if that's the slag.
Yeah.
Because he turns around and looks at Brett. He's like, is that the slag? And Brett shakes his head. Yes. The woman who took the phone call runs into the bathroom, yelling at her, calling her a slag. She ends up getting grabbed before she could do anything, and she gets pulled out.
Right.
So again, John asks Brett if that's her, and Jenny starts yelling that no matter what he's telling you, he's a liar. You can't believe him or anything like that. And John asks Jenny, what about the phone call? She was trying to get away and they killed Steve. Call the police. That's what Jenny was trying to say, is that she was trying to get away from them and because they killed Steve. And John turns and grabs Brett by the head. I don't know why. I think it was just kind of hugging him or something. I don't know. It's a weird gesture at that point. And as she does this, Jenny kind of steps forward and slices John with the razor on his back. He turns her around and grabs her, and he's kind of hugging her from behind. And his friend is trying to talk to him, saying, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. John's like, she killed the little one. Then his friend's like, hey, the police are going to be around asking questions. And he's like, then they're not going to get any answers. We take care of our own here. Jenny's like, I didn't mean to. They started it, and John says, we're going to finish it. He ends up telling Brett to go upstairs, and Brett's like, no. He ends up slapping Brett in the face really hard. He tells him not to talk back to me. And he ends up going upstairs, but he stays at the top of the stairs. And Jenny's asking him not to leave, even though he's done all this stuff, because he refused to leave. I guess she kind of thought that in that moment he was a savior of some sort. John covers her mouth and tells her to shush. He says, let's get her in the shower. He pulls her into the bathroom. His friends kind of go behind him, and you hear Jenny screaming this whole time. That's when you see Brett at the top of the stairs, and he goes into his bedroom, and as he starts closing his door, Jenny stops screaming, all of a sudden. He closes his door. He's just kind of staring in the mirror. He looks at a wound that he had on his head, just kind of staring at it. This whole time, what he's doing, he's just staring, and he ends up pulling Abby's phone out of his pocket, flips it open, goes to the videos, and he deletes them all. And he puts the phone back into his pocket. The camera kind of pans up, and he's still staring in the mirror. Then he puts Steve's sunglasses on, and then he flips them down, takes them off again, and he's just continually staring at himself in the mirror, to me, kind of looking at the monster that he is. And end movie.
But I think he was also very happy with himself as well.
Correct, that he got away with it.
Yeah. Fucking pisses me off. It's one of those movies where it's just a fucking annoying ending. I was like, what the fuck? Because like I was saying earlier, I like the movies that are like this, where it's so fucking tense the whole time through, but eventually the bad guy gets their comeuppance.
Right.
Hopefully. And in this one, they do not. And it pisses me off. It makes me so fucking mad. I was so fucking pissed. And I was like, ugh. And that ending knocks it down a little bit in how much sense I'm going to give it. But I do feel like, even though this movie was geared towards, and even in the description of the movie, it talks about, these crazy teenagers and that they're bad and misbehaving. But it's really the fucking parents.
Yeah.
The parents in this movie are absolute shitbags. They don't give a fuck about their kids. They obviously probably abuse their kids. They ignore them.
I feel that the movie gave that impression that, the mother and the father are fairly abusive.
Yeah. I mean, the hole in the door, probably done by the dad. Of course, you see the scene when they first are initially going into town, they go to that bar and the lady smacks the kid in the head. And then, of course, at the end, he smacks Brett in the head. You know that these parents are just, it's like, why do they even have kids? As it's like, just because it's kind of seems like that's the thing to do doesn't mean you have to do it.
Right.
You don't have to have kids. But the parents are just, it's like those kids at the beginning. That was a fucking bar. I mean, granted, people can take kids to bars, not a big deal. But if your kids are kids and they're running around and playing, they're kids. Like, granted, there are times where kids out and about are annoying, yes, but don't take your kids to the bar if your kids don't behave because you aren't doing a good job raising your kids.
Right. No,
And so that's
I get it.
so bad that you have to smack them in the head. I don't know. But yeah, this was definitely more of the parents are absolute shit. I mean, the kids were shit too, but that's only because what the fuck they gotta go by? Their
Right,
parents?
the parents' influence.
Yeah, or lack thereof.
So now I did like this movie like all the way through. Even the ending, it's too bad that it was Jenny because again, I felt like of everybody, despite her lack of movement of trying to find help,
Right.
I felt like she was like the most redeeming character and just how kind-hearted she was like in the beginning and everything. It's sad what happened to her, but the only reason why I like how it went was because life isn't like that. Life isn't always sunshine and roses and the badass comes out and the fight and flight thing turns to fight rather than flight
Right.
and it's not life isn't always tied up in a bow the way most movies are. When I get something like this, I guess it tends to make me think more about that kind of stuff because when you're talking about serial killers, when you're talking about murderers and things like that, like those girls that are getting killed or even those guys that are getting killed, like they don't have the option of fighting back, because of something that's going on. They don't have that option to fight back. And, what happens to them?
Right. It kind of reminded me of, is it Devil's Rejects? Where they had the woman and then she finally got away. And when she got away, she got hit by the truck.
Yeah, that was Devil's Rejects.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminded me of that. Like she goes through all of this stuff, then she gets away, then bam.
Yeah. Right.
But I wasn't pissed about that one.
That was just more built for dark humor.
Right. That was ironic, I guess. Well, the thing about this one is that you see everything they've gone through. You see they go through all this hell and torment, and you just want them to I want to see them, if nothing else, like at least, even if they did kill Jenny, if she had been able to get that razor and killed that kid,
Yeah.
I would have been fine.
Yeah, that would have been good too.
I've been okay with that. But like that, for that kid to get away with it, just pisses me off. Like if he had gotten something, I would have been okay. Even if she died, I would have been like, okay, at least he got his. But no, he was all happy with himself for getting away with some shit. And I'm like, fuck you, dude.
Right. I mean, I was gonna say that it's kind of late for a sequel, where it was like 2008, but that doesn't matter anymore. I mean, Dodgeball's getting a fucking sequel.
Is it?
Yeah.
What's the sequel to Dodgeball? What would be the next thing?
I don't know. But just the rate that sequels are coming out, it doesn't matter. I don't know if you know Apartment 7. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but that's the prequel to Rosemary's Baby.
Well, that's what that is.
Yeah, it's a prequel.
I didn't realize that.
It's a prequel to a movie that was done like in the early 70s.
Right.
Late 60s. I forget when. I think it was the 60s. But it's the prequel to that movie.
Is the prequel to that movie just Satan falling from heaven? Like, what is it?
I think it's that they're in the same apartment or some shit.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know. Characters from Rosemary's Baby's in it. And it just kind of I guess it's kind of like their origin story. I don't know.
I think they're running out of ideas in Hollywood.
If they're doing this kind of stuff, they really are.
They're just totally running out of shit. So, how many cents do you give this movie?
I would give it 7.5 cents.
Oh, okay. Now, for me, I'm not that much lower than you, actually. I would give it 6.5. If it hadn't been for the crappy ending, I probably would have if I weren't so pissed about the ending, I probably would have given it maybe even an 8. I liked it up until the end. I mean, I liked the movie. I was pissed about the end of the movie. I'm not saying that I hated it. I just was pissed about it.
Right.
And
it didn't give you what you expected.
Yeah. I didn't get any feel-good vibes out of it. So it dropped it down a couple of inches.
What are you thinking about?
A couple of cents for me. But anyway, yeah, I would have given it probably about 6.5. I'm giving it 6.5.
That's fair.
So, all right. So is that it?
That's it. We put a sock on it.
So that was Eden Lake. A film that teaches us valuable lessons, like never trust teenagers, never go camping, and if someone steals your car, just let it go and take the bus home. Next week, we're covering Lake of Death, where hopefully the bad guys won't just get away with being complete monsters. Because honestly, Eden Lake left us feeling like we just watched a PSA on why birth control is important. Lake of Death is available to watch on Shudder, AMC Plus, and Amazon Prime. Until then, be scared, be prepared, and don't get caught in the dark.